Talking of the new format of the Champions League, I don't know how surprised you both are about some of the results, some of the heavy defeats that we've seen, or if you like, looking at it from the other position, some of the public thrashings that have been meted out against, not exclusively, but against many of the smaller teams by the more powerful teams, the superpowers of the Champions League.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair to say. And I think particularly you look at, I suppose, Dortmund versus Celtic is the result that stands out in that sense this week. I think Barcelona versus Young Boys and Slovan Bratislava versus Manchester City both could have been worse for the team that lost it. I think I said at the start that with the expanded competition, you just had to look at the draw. At the moment where the draw was made, a lot of those pot four teams, you thought, hang on, this competition and this league table, when it comes out as a singular league table, is looking like it's got a longer tail than an England batting order in the mid-90s. That's where we are. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting hearing some of the chat from British-based pundits and analysts before the Dortmund-Celtic game going, oh, well, Dortmund have had quite a makeover. This could be a good time for Celtic to play them. And, of course, then Celtic get the equaliser in the first 10 minutes. And Dortmund absolutely unload on them. And what really stuck out for me is not just the individual quality being so much better with Dortmund, and they're a developing team. They've not had an easy start to the season at all. A huge makeover and new coach and all the rest of it, as we've described. But the way that Celtic didn't help themselves, they gave away the ball in their half so much, and that to me feels like one of those we're getting rinsed and we're quite tired sort of businesses. Now, I don't know, Nicky, if you feel that the competition format has an effect on that, A, in terms of expansion, and B, in terms of, there's a sense that if this one's a lost cause, maybe there's another game for us to make it up on.
Yeah, I think the one that comes into my head is, I guess, a clear example of where the mindset might shift is that Shakhtar Atlanta game this round, just because in a traditional 4-team group, I think that is absolutely a game that Shakhtar are looking at and thinking, we need to get a result here. You're treating it as a game where, because it's your home game, you need to get something from it. Maybe it's going to not be a win, but you need to dig in and make sure you get something from it. And the fact that it ends up 3-0, well, look, that's a testament to Atlanta, who are playing, they've had an up and down start to the season, but they're certainly capable of playing some very good football under Gianpiero Gasperini. Adebayo Lookman was fantastic in that game. But I do think that desperation to make sure you get something from your home games is perhaps not there in the same way as it has been. And the fact that you almost have these 3 brackets in the group now, which is top 8 belongs to a very select group, you imagine, by the end. Certainly the ones who are expecting to aim for that is a select group. But then from 9 down to 24, it's such a big pot that you definitely can afford some throwaway games. So maybe you do take some approach to those games where you go, well, we'll take a swing at this one. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And you certainly psychologically, I think, with this early point in it, could look at that and go, it's half time and it's not going well. Oh, is it worth giving everything I've got in this game? Because probably that next game on the calendar looks easier, or we're going to play teams that are less important than this. And really, how many points we're going to need to get into the 24th spot? It might not be very many at all. I think it changes the dynamic of everything, as well as taking away, on top of that, the old almost two-legged nature of some of these games where you're thinking about the head-to-head and how that could affect the tiebreakers as well. So psychologically, I think it's completely different. And I think that's leading to almost a couple of different things, one of which is maybe that feeling of, we're behind in this one, it's not going well, let's save our energy. And I think also a mindset which plays out differently for different clubs of, we can go for this, we can just have a swing at this one. If we have a swing at this one and it goes wrong, oh well. And an example of that last night, you could say, not that they were playing all out attack for the whole game, but Aston Villa late in the game against Bayern Munich committing properly to the attack, sending four men forward against forward Bayern defenders because Bayern are committing properly to the attack. I don't know that that's as open in the old group stage. So I think it's got a lot of impacts that are hard to fully draw out. Or the Leipzig Juventus game as well. Thiago Motta saying at the end of it, we always want to play like this, playing for a win, not just a draw, from 2-1 down on 10 men. But would they have if they knew a draw would have been good for them in a group? I don't know. I think there's a lot that's not fully worked out for us yet.
If there is a question about competitive balance in this new format, we probably won't be able to answer it till we know the top 8, for example.
No, it's early, yeah.
That will show us one way or another. But the question, or at least the problematic side of this, is that there have been some surprise successes, not least with Brest against Salzburg.
Yeah.
A small team like Brest, never been in the Champions League before, never been in Europe before.
Yeah.
Indeed. And then beating Salzburg, so definitively. I wonder whether actually the question isn't about competitive balance. It's more kind of what Nicky was alluding to there.
About the big scores.
Yeah. Well, not just about the big scores, but how you approach the game. If you're not as bothered about your home advantage, then, well, you've got yourself to blame, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder in that Salzburg-Brest game in particular, if you look at the game as a whole, the way that Brest were able to pick them off in the back half of that game was a little bit like Salzburg, I think, did have the feeling of this is a home game and we have to win it, because they started out pretty strongly in the first 25 minutes. Then they concede the first goal. And as the game goes on, it feels like there's a little bit of anxiety from Salzburg to open the game up, and that leads Brest, and especially they use the subs well. Mama Balde was brilliant when he came on as substitute. He was at Troyes and Lyon before last season, and you know he makes a couple of assists for those last couple of goals, and they manage the situation very, very well, Brest, which I think is notable when, as you say, Dotun, they have like no European experience together, but clearly they have a very, very good coach in Eric Roy, who's got a lot of experience, mainly as a sporting director, but has done a great job as coach there in the last couple of years. And it's remarkable because you get to the end of that game, and of course it was one of the early games on Tuesday, and Brest are top of this massive table, obviously only for a little time until Dortmund go and beat Celtic and leap above them on goal difference. But if you'd have said to Brest, you get 6 points off the first 2 games, obviously they'd have snapped your hand off. Now, how they're able to balance that with their domestic form, that's always going to be a question, I think, for a club of this size who's perhaps not quite prepared for it. They lost some important players in the summer as well. They've got another couple of important players coming back from injury at the moment. But it's funny, it almost worked for them that they got a day's extra rest. They played Auxerre on Friday night. They were awful, got beaten 3-0, and Roy gave them such a public dressing down. He said, look, if I could have taken off all 10 outfield players at halftime, I would have done. It was that bad. He really got stuck into them for their application, for their attitude, for everything. He's like, look, I might have to drop a load of you for this Champions League game, because he was so visibly angry that you kind of felt that you get a performance. But still, obviously, Salzburg have a lot more experience in Europe. You would expect something more of that, something a little bit closer. And Brest went there and not just gave a great performance, but managed the game really well. Now, of course, it's not quite as much of a shock, but I think it's slightly different when you look at, say, beating a team by a big score who on paper are better than you. I think you look at Benfica Atletico on the second night this week, and that, I think, was more a case of Atletico waving the white flag rather than really chasing the game. I think that was slightly different, wasn't it, Nicky?
Well, again, you just wonder how this looks different if it's a 6-team group and actually your result against Benfica might matter, because Benfica are the sort of team who quite often end up in that second, third conversation, right? So that's the level you might think of, and therefore it becomes important to win that game and make sure you're not getting drawn into that second or third conversation with them. I think that Atletico, it's completely logical coming off the derby, that the derby was the big game for them, of course, and that's a lot of emotional energy that went into that game. Injuries with players coming out of that game as well. Lenormand obviously not playing. That all plays into it. But at the same time, I think that those are exaggerated. I think obviously the derby is going to be the more important game even in the old group. But in the old group, you still think of it as one of 6. This is still a team that could knock you out. You have to beat them, or at least give your best go at beating them. Whereas in this, again, with 8 games, you can look at it at this point and think, oh, all right, this one's gone. Save our energies, go to the next one. I do wonder if some teams are going to end up kicking themselves for taking that mindset. I do wonder if some teams are going to look back and regret it, because when it comes down to it, when we've got a point in time when players are openly talking about striking from too many games, you don't want that playoff in January. But I do think that right now, everything feels a bit less high tension, which is a mixed bag, because I actually think in some ways that is creating for fans a more joyful experience. I think that for teams like Brest, probably there's a bit of a pressure off. This is just fun moment at the start of this competition that is playing well for them in particular games. But I do think as neutrals, it feels low tension right now, and it won't be by game 8, but it does right now.
I think the other thing we have to say in terms of these flurries of goals, this is not something that the Champions League is a stranger to anyway, because you think, I suppose not quite our year 0, but that sort of thing when you look at the La Remontada when Barcelona came back on PSG from 4-0 down to win the second leg 6-1, and then you get the Romontada the year after that when Roma do it to Barcelona. And then you get Liverpool, Barcelona. I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm ganging up on Barcelona here, but you know, it's not me who got the results. Yeah. I think you look at like quite a lot of those situations when you get a foothold in a Champions League game. You just tear through that paper wall afterwards. You know, I think you do see these like little mini flurries, and momentum has been huge in Champions League football in the last couple of years. So I think we'd need a bigger sample size to see if this is reflective of the format, or maybe this is just the Champions League being the Champions League in a slightly different format, which is what it is.
Well, maybe we have to take those big score lines and put them to one side to ask perhaps a more fundamental question. Is this a Champions League in which everybody can beat well, at least the big teams can be beaten. You know, Real Madrid can be beaten.
Yeah, well, that happened last night, didn't it? Whether Real Madrid can be beaten by anyone, Nicky, is a different question, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure. Looking at I've got the table up in front of me, the full 36 team table, which is great, by the way. I think one of the most fun things about this is that right now you've got Brest supporters who can go, we're third and we're above Bayern Munich and we're above Real Madrid, and you get to have that feeling of it all. But yes, looking at some of the teams, the lower end of that, do I believe that Slovan Bratislava can beat Real Madrid? I'm sorry, Slovan Bratislava fans, but I think I'm pretty sceptical.
Yeah, the strength in depth will come and make the difference in the second half, at least, of this Champions League season, I would have thought.